Hello, this is Gordon McRae. Welcome to the Humanity Podcast, the regular audio update from Humanist Society Scotland.
In this episode, we venture out into Edinburgh to meet some of the acts performing in this year's Fringe Festival. First up, we have HSS conference speaker Kate Smurthwaite. So I'm here with Kate Smurthwaite. I've just seen her Fringe show on masculinity, which is certainly very different from a lot of what we've seen from you before.
Yeah, it is. It's a completely different show. It's a real... I won't go into too much detail, but basically I don't play myself in the show. In the past, all of my shows have started with, "Hey, I'm Kate, how are you doing?" And this show, there's a bit of a twist to it. And I'm kind of highlighting the problems with toxic masculinity by satirising them more directly than usual. So I'm quite surprised that Nicole is still willing to hang out with me after that. It would have been quite legitimate to run away. But it's
this
lovely
is not
to be
what
here.
I signed up for.
Exactly.
So where did the character of Milo come from?
Well, I mean, you might guess where the name comes from if you follow internet abuse. I play Milo Standards is the name, which is. But what it really comes from is the idea that I felt if I wanted to talk about men, to just stand there as a woman and talk about what men do and you know aspects of masculinity that are good and bad. I just thought that's going to come across as kind of one-sided and lectury. So I thought instead let's do the show as a guy, and that's where it started. I was invited to do a couple of drag king shows, and when I kind of put some feelers out, and there's a really thriving drag king scene in the UK, almost all with people singing and dancing and that kind of stuff, and actually a surprising amount of stripping, which is quite interesting. I was fascinated by it when I sort of dipped a toe in the water. And so I went to some of those shows, and there really wasn't a lot of stand-up, so I went there and did some stand-up and talked about men's issues at those shows, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought, let's actually build this out into a whole show.
Oh, great. So you're obviously a very outspoken feminist. You
Yes.
work with abortion rights. Did you intend to, when you kind of started your career in comedy, did you intend to tackle these sorts of issues as you go, or is it something that just
not
kind of happened?
at all. I utterly intended to be a sort of I wanted to be an MC, and I wanted to be a sort of likeable observational comic and to talk about everyday life. But I think this is the case with so many women in different industries. It's like then I was just bombarded with sexism. Now, at the same time that I'd started out doing comedy, I'd also started writing a little blog about politics, just about when you pick up a newspaper and you think, oh, why are they doing that? I'll write a little article, just to, even if it's just a sort of Facebook post, like, oh, this is stupid, I mean, and I think initially it was a very sort of, war is wrong, or justice, free the, Edinburgh 3 or whatever it is. I'd be that kind of stuff. But I started to get recognised for my political writing at the same time that I was starting to get recognised for my comedy, and then then my shows gradually became sort of smarter, and I put more kind of sciencey stuff in and more kind of interesting stuff in, and then I just thought, let's take the stuff I'm writing about and actually do a comedy show that covers those issues, like a political comedy show. And the first one of those was 2009. So, I guess this would be the, whatever that is, 9, 10, 11, 12... This would be the 8th of those that I've done. So this is my, 11th solo show, but my 8th purely political solo show. I've done one that was about dangerous sports, 2 about evolution, and the rest have been about politics in some way or another.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So,
but it's also the case that... Yeah, but it's also the case that, I mean, there was no... I would love to have not talked about women's issues, but that's my life. I think for a lot of women that I'd love to not campaign for women's rights, but if I don't, where are my rights? You can't. It's interesting because you do see those sort of complaints of like, why do black comics talk so much about racism? Well, the answer is because that's what they have to live with and deal with every day, and they'd love to not talk about it. They'd love for it not to be an issue, but it's just not a privilege they have. It's either we fight for it or we just sit back and put up with it. So that's where
just
I ended up.
Keep on keeping on, keep on fighting, I guess.
Yeah.
I think as well, being a woman in comedy is something with its own set of challenges. obviously it's something you touched on a bit in the show as well, with the whole women aren't funny idea.
Oh yeah, I mean it's
How
interesting
do you
because
deal with
if somebody says women can't be surgeons, usually there's a pretty instant like, what are you talking about? That's sexism. But people say, I just don't find women funny. That's sort of something which is still kind of socially acceptable to say in a lot of places, which is kind of odd, that as if it tells you two lies. Firstly, the idea that your gender is somehow linked to your ability to do your job, which it never is unless you're a Y-fronts model or a wet nurse, basically. And frankly, I do model some pretty flashy Y-fronts in the show as well, but you really would have to see it to understand about that. But also, it pays into this lie that comedy is this mystical thing that you either just can do or just can't do. And I think that's one of the most insidious lies about comedy. The best comedians are the ones that work really hard at it and really put the time in learning all the skills and all the craft of comedy. The idea that some people just are funny, it's a lie told by comedians who don't want anybody else to threaten their job prospects by giving it a go. Like, it's just not true. Sure, some people have a little bit more natural aptitude towards one job versus another, but ultimately, if you want to do something and you work really hard at it, you make a lot of progress, and the best comedians are the ones that work really, really hard and write something really, really beautiful at the end of it. Yeah.
So again, it's just keep on going. Really keep on.
Yeah, it's like if you want to do something, put the hours in, and I think it pays off. Yeah.
Well, we are of course very, very excited to have you along to our conference as our after-dinner speaker this year.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited to be doing it as well.
It should be an absolutely fantastic day and evening, of course. You're very open about the fact that you're an atheist.
Yeah, it's pretty well known. It's arguably the most known fact about me because of that YouTube clip. That I don't know whether you'll have to beat me out, but it's called Atheist Bitch Slap. That's me. That's me in 2010 on The Big Questions on BBC One. Yes, with the fairly infamous "I'm not an idiot" line, which I believe these days you can get on T-shirts, although not T-shirts that I've made, but you're welcome to print it onto your own at leisure. Yeah,
well, that's good to know. Actually, we might look those up. Do you consider yourself a humanist?
Well, actually, the answer just depends on what definition of humanist comes round. Do I consider myself somebody who thinks that... I consider myself... if you define it as to say that I'm a human rights fundamentalist, then absolutely. I'm very much a hardline human rights fundamentalist. Sometimes I hear humanism expressed as the search for meaning in life without the need for irrationality, and then I'm never quite sure, because I think sometimes, I don't know, there's sort of thrusting quest for meaning in life. I think maybe sometimes something that's good about life is that it can be a bit meaningless. And I'm not against that attitude of like, there is no higher purpose, kind of choose your own rather than the need to find something.
Yeah. Celebrate the one life you have is what we always keep coming back to.
Yeah, you see, that I can get totally on board with. Is like, you get one go, and in actual fact, I think if you really think about that line, it ties in not even with atheism, but with an absolutely overpowering anti-theism that I do have a strong sense of identity with, in the sense that, the one life we have, and atheists often talk about, as long as religious people practice in the privacy of their own home and they don't bother anybody and it's a private matter. But actually, even if it's a private matter, to convince yourself that you mustn't, enjoy or express your sexuality, that you mustn't enjoy or get involved with other things that many religions prohibit, such as like drinking or eating bacon or whatever it is. Like, a lot of people get a lot of joy from those, and I think to preclude yourself from it getting the very, very most out of the one life we have, I think it's difficult to do that while adhering, even if it's only internally, to a set of rules and regulations that have been externally imposed by patriarchal, sexist, in almost all cases, religious organisations. So I think if you really read the letter of humanism, it's difficult to find a way through it that isn't fairly overtly atheist and even anti-theist. Not that you can't, enjoy a bit of spirituality. I love a good carol service. Me and Dawkins, we'll see you there. It's all good. Yeah.
Well, we actually earlier on in the Fringe, I went along to London Humanist Choir.
Oh, I love those guys. They're lovely. Sometimes they do a bit of free flyering for me. Thank you very much, London Humanist Choir, for sending all your audiences my way. You're the bestest, etc.
It is absolutely fantastic to just see people coming together and just enjoying things, enjoying the music that they're putting on, and some of the choices that they make for their show are really quite fun and amusing.
Oh, they're wonderful. And actually, I think it's something that atheists and humanists need to do more. You know, I think actually that one of the complaints I have about atheism and humanism is that it isn't always particularly welcoming to women. There can be a sort of hard edge to it, that sort of like anything goes, this is all bollocks kind of harshness to it. That often, you know, the sort of atheist movement is tied into this sort of like free speech, you know, which is great, and then free speech suddenly becomes defending violent pornography, and then you look around and you realise that you've built a completely male atheist organisation, and it's so stupid, because what does patriarchal religion do more than anything? Well, it screws women over, and actually 52% of the world's population is female, and you know, some very sizable chunk of the world's population is non-theistic. If we could all just get together and make it clear how much atheism and humanism have to offer to women, and make women feel really welcome in those organisations, and encouraged, you know, to take on leadership roles and all this kind of stuff. I think there's so much to be gained, and women have so much to be gained from getting them out of those structures of patriarchy that do so much damage. And I mean, it's understandable that religion wants to control women. You can't control a population unless you get the uteruses in, you know, that's the source, that's the next generation. You have to control them before you can take control of the rest of the population. So yeah, it's fascinating. But a lot of patriarchal religion is about telling women who they can sleep with and who they can't sleep with, and who they ought to sleep with, and when they ought to do it, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot to be gained from creating a humanist culture that is much more warm and friendly and supportive. And churches, you know, what are they best at? If you go to churches, what are they full of? Elderly women who are lonely and could really use a bit of company. And, you know, why can't we humanists be the people that are providing that service and providing that sense of community? I think there's a lot to be gained from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are, as I said, really very, very excited to have you on.
Oh, me too. I can't wait to come and be part of it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you in September.
Yay!
I'm here with Walrus Theatre Company.
So I'm Sam, I'm the writer.
I'm Beth, I'm an actor.
I'm Ed, I'm the director.
And I'm Ewan, and I'm also one of the actors in the show.
So you're obviously here for your fringe run for Lemons, or
Nice.
Lemons for short. I hope that was enough lemons.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Lemons.
Can you tell us a little bit about the show, first of all, and kind of where the idea first came from?
Over to you.
Ed and I have an ongoing dispute over who came up with the idea.
Oh, really?
I think it was a shared genesis.
It was a shared genesis, is a nice way of putting it. The central concept of the play is inspired by a poem, which is about a government-imposed daily word limit.
Okay.
We like that idea, and we like the idea of examining it in a couple's relationship. And me and Ed started talking about it at the Fringe 2 years ago now, 2014. And we started talking about what it meant and what we could use it to examine and explore. And then I went away and wrote a load of stuff and brought it here to these guys. We wanted to work with Beth and Ewan. And so we brought it into a room and kind of started messing around with it.
Okay. What was the poem out of interest?
Poem was
The Quiet World.
Quiet World by Jeffrey McDaniel.
Okay.
Which is beautiful.
It's a great
I'll
poem.
have to look that one up. So I thought one of the really interesting things about it is that it's kind of two plays in one, in a way. So like you've got obviously the political side of things and, you know, raising questions about free speech and censorship, but then on the other hand you've got it all centred within this relationship, and at times it's almost like romantic comedy-esque in kind of the way it's set up. How did that happen? Because it's not really something that you'd expect for this kind of idea.
I feel like a lot of the conversations that Sam and I had early on were about talking about, with that central idea of a word limit, what that opened up, what sort of questions that idea could be used to explore. And Sam, I think, very much sort of came at it from the angle of going, I'd like this to be a play about a couple and how they talk to each other and their relationship and what this word limit does for them personally. And I spoke a lot in those early conversations about the extent to which it could also be a political play. That's not to say that either of us didn't want what the other wanted.
Yeah, no.
I think it was just very much a case that those were the things that interested us. And so in developing the script from August of 2014 through, well, essentially over the course of a year before it was a final thing, it was a matter of getting that balance and working out what the story ought to be to make those points about communication as an interpersonal issue and communication as something that is inherently political.
Okay. So there were no kind of arguments when you were first putting it together?
Oh, there were arguments. There were a lot of arguments, but they were good arguments because I think it worked really well in that we all kind of wanted to make the same thing, and the arguments were about the best way to get it there rather than about what it should be.
Yeah.
I think also what's so brilliant is the way that Sam, as a writer, has taken ideas that came organically from the rehearsal room or things that we've chipped in as actors or Ed chipped in as the director and made them so central to the core of the play. In doing that, has made those two halves of the play, as you've described it, the relationship and the play's politics or ethics, completely codependent, insofar as their relationship relies upon their different political standpoints and the different approaches, and one can't really exist without the other, and I think that's what Sam's done brilliantly in the script.
Okay, that's actually one thing that I was wondering about, is because I know you've been working on this for quite a while now. I think it's been, well, as you say, you started in 2014, but I believe you've been performing it for about a year?
18 months.
Yeah.
18 months is the first show, yeah.
So kind of how has it changed and evolved in that time? Because kind of presumably to sort of keep things kind of fresh, and there always is going to be a certain amount of growth with any kind of play.
But it's changed. I mean, it's changed in many ways, a lot over the course of the 18 months. The first, I don't even know, what, 6 months it wasn't finished. We were performing it, and we'd come out and go, okay, well this doesn't work, this might be better, blah 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 blah. And then obviously once the script was published, we couldn't mess around with it like that anymore. That was set in stone. But since then, we've still had to try and keep it fresh, as you said, for ourselves, because if we're not enjoying it, no one's enjoying it.
Yeah.
So we did have a re-rehearsal before we came to Edinburgh this year, just sort of trying to freshen it up, and I think it worked. I think it feels fresh to me anyway.
Yeah, I think also what we've really always found with this play is that it kind of takes on the politics and the big political stories of the time. So last summer, it felt very post-2015 general election, 5 more years of Tories austerity, and there were a lot of people who read austerity into the play, which is perfectly valid, and it does very much exist within it. This year, people are coming out and going, "Oh my God, it's a play about Brexit."
Yeah.
And
I can definitely see that.
Yeah, it's just amazing how this play that was written before those two polling days and before so many other political events seems to take on resonances of big political events, and I think that's partly to do with the political current of the play running so deep, hitting on something that's so massive, which is the idea of a big idea of how like freedom of speech is contributing to emancipation and how we limit ourselves in that.
And I think also there's an extent to which it reflects those events because it's a play that asks, at least to some extent, what democracy really is and who it serves. And that's certainly a question that people ask in the wake of any general election, in the wake of any referendum. The fact that there are people who those results benefit and people who those results cost dearly. And that, I think, is a question that the play attempts to ask rather than answer to some extent. So that's why I think it finds a way to dovetail with contemporary sort of political moods. Because without being specific, it's talking about the inequity of lawmaking, or the potential inequity of lawmaking.
Yeah, like the themes are always going to be relevant, regardless of what's going on. But do you think that what is happening, like current events, do kind of inform your performance or the way that you're pitching the show? Whether
it's
intentionally
amazing,
or not?
We've all said since we've been in Edinburgh particularly, the mood in, sorry, if you've read it, so the mood in the space during the scene where the law gets passed, where they're watching the TV and they see that it gets passed, isn't like it's ever been before, post-Brexit. It's like, it's you can feel, I don't know if you, you can feel the audience twitching almost, going, we recognise this, and performing it has been different because we go, God, we know what this feels like now.
Yeah, there is that real sense of sadly before the referendum, that scene was very much, we were very much acting, and we were very much going, God, really trying to imagine this. Let's try and imagine telling out this law is going to come into it's going to be put on the statute books. Now we know what that feels like. But like Beth said, the weirdest thing is kind of being aware that the audience are there going, oh wow, we know what that feels like as well.
Yeah, it's changed, particularly that scene, quite a lot for us, I think.
But also there are other strands in the play that sometimes you just feel when you know, in a show, sometimes you feel like a certain kind of strand in the play is really hitting home with the audience, and this run we've had some of our most quietly engaged audiences, and I think even though the audiences we're performing to now are bigger, they're not necessarily raucous, and I think part of that is to do with a real political ground zero, maybe. And people feeling very, very unsettled and alienated. And seeing that in the play.
One question that kind of kept coming up in the play that I thought was really interesting was the question of, is this actually technically censorship? So obviously you got the one character saying, well, it's not, like you can still say whatever you want, you just have to say it differently. Did your feelings on that kind of question change as you were writing it and kind of as you got to know it? Like, did you kind of, because for me reading it, I started off thinking, well, of course it's censorship, but actually technically that point is right. It's, you can still say what you want.
It depends. It's all just semantics, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is censorship, I think. I mean, it's worse than censorship. it's but yeah, like you said, technically, no, it's not. Technically. But I don't think that
technically doesn't really matter so much when it's really happening.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what the play is trying to say, if the play has a message, which I'm not sure if it does, it's that people should listen to each other more. And I think what it's saying about some of the stuff it says about freedom of speech is that freedom of speech is all well and good, and it's great to be able to like have your opinions and express them eloquently. But if you're not really communicating with someone, if someone's not listening to you and responding, then it's not all for nothing, but it's less important. And so I think whether it's censorship or not does matter hugely, but I think the play is saying, listen, like, value what you're saying, and listen to it more.
There are moments in the play when the characters are able to be more truthful and more direct and honest after the word limit has come in than they were before. And I think that's the kind of the great irony and that kind of takeaway message that someone's talking about.
When you're forced to think about what it is that you're saying, I mean, maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing to be forced into thinking about what it is that you have to say. Obviously, I don't think that we should, but you know what I mean. There are scenes in the play where you go, oh, they would never have gotten to this point otherwise, and maybe that's a silver lining.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, for me, reading it was one of the key reasons why it works so well to set it within a relationship as opposed to kind of wider society, is because quite often when we talk about these issues of freedom of speech and censorship, we're thinking about them in a very abstract sense, whereas this is kind of how it would affect people's lives. And obviously, reframing this conversation from thoughts to amount of what you're saying is very different to what we're seeing going on currently. But it's a very interesting thing to actually think about.
Yeah.
And I know that as you've been developing it, you've kind of taken it into schools and kind of gone through it with pupils as well. And I know that you've written and said that you've had some really interesting discussions with them afterwards about the issues that it's raised. When you were developing it, was that something that you intended to be a byproduct of the play? Or
Not
was
at all. That came actually very much from having gone to the National Student Drama Festival and meeting a lot of the school kids there, because a lot of schools do sort of school trips to go and see all the shows and just be involved in the festival. And we met a lot of kids there who had so many wonderful things to say and such interesting insights into what we were doing. I think that we hadn't even really contemplated necessarily, and we were like, God, these are the type of people that we want to carry on talking to about this. And then it just sort of that sparked from there, I think. And it's been amazing. I love the school trips.
I think one of the things that's been really interesting about talking to young people is less of an immediate preoccupation with the idea of metaphor, and instead talking about the issues as the play presents them, rather than what the play might be trying to say about something else. In the sense that I think while we were working on it, although we thought a lot about the ways in which it does respond and react to contemporary political climates and things happening in the world today, it was also to some extent a play which we just wanted to be about what it is about. And to be about a world in which there is a word limit placed on what these characters can say aloud per day, and the implications of that. And the most interesting conversations we've had about the implications of that have been with young people. Because rather than going, I see what you've done in talking about the Conservative government through this play, or yes, I see how this play responds to Brexit, they go, what would it mean not to be able to talk? What would it mean to have to do that? It feels like we've had those conversations, more regularly with young people than we have with any other audiences, and that's been really fascinating. And their responses to those kinds of questions are invariably informed and incisive and considered.
Yeah, incredibly imaginative.
I think part of taking any, it's such a sort of a call to arms for young theatre companies, but if you want reinvigorating and being put on your toes, go into schools, do days in schools, and the imagination that even older teenagers can still have, and the imaginative leaps they will make, and how quickly they'll get on board with the work is really remarkable, I think.
Yeah. really fun.
One thing that I did wonder, as I was reading about the play as well as looking at it, was as you've been working on it, did you ever try to impose a word limit on yourselves for
I think that
a
might be
day or?
The most common question.
Really?
Yes.
All right.
In a rehearsal.
Not for a whole
Not for
day.
very long
I
time.
tried to do. So Ed came up with this idea of doing the scenes that happen before the limit with a word limit on, and the scenes that happen after
Without.
It was terrible.
We didn't do it for very long because it's impossible. Come on.
And Beth and I were very bad at it.
We're quite wordy people, so.
I mean, it was interesting. I think the most interesting exercise in that respect was to take the scenes where they are limited and let the actors have those conversations with as many words as they wanted, which I think helped you feel the sense of limit
Yeah.
when you then went back to the script.
It's hard. That was the biggest challenge for me, I think, with the post-limit scenes because it's nothing that you could possibly even try and relate to. So doing that was really handy because you then had a grasp on what it was that they were trying to do but not quite able to do in those scenes, and that helped a lot for me.
You didn't feel the need to attempt it while you were writing?
No, I was okay with that. I was okay with not doing that. No, it was difficult to write because there were like some scenes, for example, where I went, okay, I know this scene happens at a particular time in the day, and therefore I know that at this particular time on this particular day, they wouldn't have very many words left. But I know that I need to get a certain amount of information across, and that was really hard. And I kept to kind of stay realistic within the world of the story and get across the beats that you needed to. So it took a long time to be able to do that, and a lot of playing around and a lot of getting angry and frustrated, and then going, oh no, this could actually be quite good.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge to set yourself to write when you have such a strict word limit. I mean, it
was really annoying.
We've had a hilarious amount of reviews written in 140 words.
Really?
Like a ridiculous amount of reviews. Yeah, they all seem to manage fine. It's just you struggling.
You see people. I saw someone yesterday who, in a scene where one of us had a smaller number of words left, I think it was about 6 words or something, I saw someone counting along with those 6 words as I said them, and then look at the person that they were with as if to say, yeah, they got it right. Like,
we tried to.
Yeah, we're really trying. Really trying. Sam did sit and count them all.
In the first couple of drafts we found, or after the first show we ever did or something, we looked back and realised that I had miscounted numbers and they were just getting way over. Luckily the audience didn't pull that stuff that time.
The other day after a show, one of our friends came to see the show, and he said as he was walking out, he overheard as he was walking out, he overheard some of our audience members go, was he talking about it, and one of them just went, I just used 6 words just then! And they were all like, oh my god, and it does just make you think in a way that I've never thought about before anyway.
Yeah, it's like the line of using 40 words to buy a smoothie.
Yeah.
That kind of thing of just, you never quite think about how much you say and how much might be completely useless.
Yeah.
So, obviously at the end of the Fringe run now, very successful Fringe run as well, because you sold out. What's next?
We're off on tour.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's on tour. I'm not going.
Ewan and I leave Edinburgh. I leave tomorrow, Ewan leaves on Monday, and we're both in Plymouth for our first show on the 5th of September. We've got about a week before we have to get back to the grind.
Do it all again.
So if there are any Plymouth listeners.
Yeah. And we're touring until mid-November.
Yeah.
And we're going to 10...
11.
10 venues. 10 venues, including Plymouth, Hull, Manchester, Cardiff, Sheffield, Lincoln, Crewe, Birmingham, Bristol, and London. And I remembered all of them.
Well done.
Very good. That was amazing.
Yeah, that was really good. I've never been able to do that.
It's not in order. No problem.
That's not in order.
But yeah, so that's exciting.
Yes.
That'll be really fun.
That's very exciting.
And it's going to be nice to just... I mean, Edinburgh audience is always brilliant and incredibly switched on and very, very willing to accept stuff, because obviously the festival is so varied that people are really up for anything. But it's always nice to take it to new places and kind of get the feel of each different location.
Yeah.
Audiences in Bristol were very, very different from audiences we've had in London, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been really exciting that we get to take to loads of different places.
And places that we've never been to. And I'm really excited. I've never been to Plymouth. I can't wait.
Oh, great.
So I want to tell.
Yeah.
I've never been.
It's by the sea, I know that one.
Yeah.
Well, best of luck.
Thank
for the
you.
tour
Thank you very
and
much.
for the play. And again, congratulations on such a successful run.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Cheers.
Thank
Very
you.
much.
That's
Really
lovely.
nice to meet you.
So, if you're an atheist, where do you get your morals from?
The question comes like a hand clap in the middle of a minute's silence for war dead, unexpected and kind of offensive. Its vowels bend like young knees at mandatory school assemblies, sing-song syllables echoing our fathers from 5-year-olds to the person posing this question to me. Who makes me think of the insult "you are too clean," which doesn't sound mean, but it really is. So I don't say that in case it hurts their feelings, because that would be wrong. So where do my morals come from? I stumble into an I guess I figured if you're nice to people and try and help society, then they can be nice to you.
Don't you think that's a little bit selfish?
Selfish? Yeah, I guess it's selfish to have a hypothetical moral bartering system with society in the same way that it's selfish to only do good because you want to get into God's after party. And you know what? A child who behaves perfectly but only when offered sweets is still a brat. But I don't say that because that would hurt their feelings, which would be wrong. See, they have a litany of literature and song they can clothe themselves in to keep out eternity's cold winds. They have a written reason why they matter, while I stumble naked, staring into a star-streaked sky that can't look back, clinging to a careless planet that would not flinch if I evaporated completely, leaving nothing but memory. So here's where I get the devil and angel on either side of me. It comes from two faces, each smiling with the warmth of a coal-stoked hearth, and hearts without language to deny affection. Family that allowed me to learn about God just like I did Santa Claus alone, which never once ruined Christmas. It comes from laughs like sparks in darkness, friends who became architects of the Parthenon of my perception, engineers of my empathy, telling me if you love something, you fight for it without raising fists, because everyone is someone's daughter or son. It comes from the rough days, and seeing the lines on somebody's face fade when laughter washes them away. It comes from strangers whose cracked countenances let the daylight in by simply asking, "Are you okay?" It comes from pay it forward. It comes from the golden rule predating religion of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It comes from the stars being the clay that we are all moulded from. These are my patchwork morals. And for 32 years I have painstakingly stitched them together, and I am proud to wear their weightlessness like a gown. I get my morals from everything and everyone. You see, unlike you, I never needed them to be written down.
I'm here with Lloyd Robinson, an Edinburgh-based performance poet who wrote and recorded Selfish, which is the poem you just heard.
Hello.
Having listened to a fair bit of your work, religion is kind of a repeated theme that runs through a lot of your poems, or is kind of at least mentioned or hinted at in a lot of them.
Yeah. Well,
Is that something that
you did intentionally, or is it something that you kind of noticed yourself, having stepped back and looked at your work once you'd finished recording it?
I think it's something that just kind of came out really without me consciously planning it, with one or two notable exceptions. Like the one I wrote for you guys, for example, was a fairly obvious example of that. But I think where it comes from is when I was young, when I was growing up, I did believe quite strongly in God, and as I kind of slowly drifted away and kind of asked more questions about the world, I became more and more kind of attracted to humanism and a secular lifestyle, secular perspective, and so in a way there's a degree of anger there. I think simply because like it felt a little bit like I had been deceived.
Right.
I should quantify that, because you see, I was lucky enough to be raised by a very, very loving family. My dad is atheist. My mum is, I think she's kind of agnostic, but mainly atheist, like mainly secular. And so, like, the only introduction to the church and to religion and that sort of thing that I got was in school assemblies when I was a tiny little kid, and a teacher, in fact all of my teachers, were telling me, kneel down and say thank you to the magic person in the sky. And you know, when you're a kid, you believe it, you really do. And the reason why I say I'm very fortunate is because my parents didn't kind of push me too hard to their way of thinking. I mean, I did occasionally kind of lock swords with my dad over that, but nothing kind of really serious. They allowed me to come to the conclusion on my own that I was an atheist, that I didn't believe in God. And it basically means because I wasn't growing up in a church, I wasn't kind of going to these religious meetings every week, so there was no one there to say, it's alright, you're just having a crisis of faith, it's perfectly normal, just come back into the fold, it's okay, don't ask any questions. So yeah, I mean, especially in the subjects of kind of loss, like when a serious tragedy happens or a death or something like that, I find when I write about something like that, my approach to religion does often come up.
Yeah.
Just simply because it's very common to hear, you know, God has a plan, it's alright, they're in a better place, or something like that. Oh, yeah, fine, I'd love to think they're in a better place, that would be a very nice thing to think. But at the same time, if there is a God, why is he making us sit through all these horrible things in the first place? So it just doesn't really work. So that's usually the context that religion comes up in my work.
And I think that kind of thinking as well, the idea of them being in a better place, or you know, God has a plan, it takes the focus off of the person whose life we're meant to be celebrating.
Yeah, exactly.
And puts it on religion, on this God.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the whole kind of switch of focus, as in we need to focus on celebrating the life of this person who has been lost to us, does come up in one of my poems in particular, which is on my album. Cheeky little plug there. Sorry.
Oh, go on then.
And that's because there's a little kind of cliche that all poets, especially in like slam poets, they all have like a dead relative poem. Or you know, something that will really tug on the heartstrings, and I'm aware of that cliche. So what I wanted to do is write something that was about that, but also kind of had a little bit of hope in it, had a little bit of kind of a little bit of fun, even. So I wrote something along those lines, and I finished it off with basically a list of all of like the good qualities and really cool stories of the person that had been lost to us. And every time, well, not every time I perform it, but sometimes when I perform it, I see people just kind of had a little bit of a giggle at the end, and I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. That's what's important, you know, celebrating the life of this person, even though they're not around anymore. So hopefully some people in the audience will get to know them even though they never met them.
That's a really lovely thing.
Thanks.
Okay, so obviously the poem that we just heard had a musical backing on it as well.
Yeah.
And listening to your album as well, which you plugged earlier, each one of the tracks does have its own musical accompaniment, and that's not necessarily something that I would expect necessarily from poetry output. Is that something that's kind of particularly important to you, to create a whole track as opposed to simply a poem?
Yeah. I kind of came to music before I came to poetry. I was playing guitar since I was like 15 odd. I mean, I don't pretend to be kind of like massively proficient, but I'm good enough to kind of express ideas along that lines. I mean, you do see this sort of thing crop up every so often. Scroobius Pip is very famous for doing it. And he's kind of I've had like I feel a bit self-conscious when people say this, but on a couple of occasions people have compared me to Scroobius Pip, and I'm like, no, I'm not that good. I'm not that good, but thank you. But at the same time, to be honest, I think that's more because he's known for putting music behind his words, and there aren't many other people, especially not like famous, that do that. So that there's kind of a very limited number of people they can compare me to. So they will automatically go to him. I mean, I'm quite influenced by a group called the Loud Poets, specifically the Echo Birds, which is their kind of associated band. It adds a whole extra layer to the poetry, I think, because I think language is very musical. So putting music behind it is just a really logical move. It really provides like a much fuller sound, and it's also very good for grabbing an audience that wouldn't necessarily be attracted to poetry in a normal sense.
Sure.
You have people come away from a Loud Poets gig sometimes going, oh, I didn't expect that from poetry, like that sort of thing. Because like poetry is, as a medium, it's very fresh actually. It's very kind of liberating, because the definition for a poem is really, really broad. But the thing is, when you say poetry, it immediately conjures the mental image of, dusty kind of old men complaining.
There's some preconceptions there.
Or like A-level students talking about how no one will have sex with them. That sort of
beatniks
thing.
And berries.
Which is it's fine. It all has a valid place in the spectrum of the art form, but I think a lot of people don't realise that poetry can be just very exciting and very kind of surprising as well.
It could be loud, as the name suggests.
Yeah, it can.
And theirs was the Fringe show that you were involved in this year.
I did a guest slot with them at their Edinburgh Fringe show for one night. I also busked on their stage at the Royal Mile, which was a lot of fun. It was also very wet. But it's great. It's great to kind of jump up on a stage, and like have to try and grab the attention of an audience that doesn't necessarily, have any interest in you at all.
On the Royal Mile during the Fringe, well. I mean that must be quite an undertaking.
Like having to work for that and actually getting the attention is just very, very gratifying. I think this probably explains what I get out of slams as well. Because like, generally speaking, I'm not a massively competitive individual until it comes to stuff like this.
So festival's obviously over now.
Yeah.
What comes next?
Well, people generally need a little bit of rest.
I'm sure, yes.
In Edinburgh, at least. Glasgow has got a lot on, like, throughout the year. It's wonderful. Like, every week there's at least one night on. And in fact, they've had to kind of set up a Facebook group so they can actually kind of coordinate. So
keep track of it.
Yeah, so nights don't clash. You know, so you don't have like 3 things going on at the exact same time and competing for audiences. I don't think Edinburgh has quite as many nights. I think that's fair to say. The nights that it does have are very consistent though, and what you notice is they kind of come and go with the students. When the students come back, it gets kind of very, very raucous. It gets very engaging and exciting. And I'm also looking to put on my own monthly night with a couple of other local talents. I want to make it kind of music and poetry though. So, you know, you got acoustic musicians and songwriters and poets as well. Maybe like a few variety acts, you know, some stand-up comics. I'd quite like to make a little haven for performers and artists who maybe don't fit into the usual kind of niches that you get in the general open mics that are kicking about, because you get loads and loads of stand-up open mics, you get a decent amount of music open mics, you get some poetry open mics in Edinburgh. As I said, the ones we do have are very consistent. But like there's cabaret artists out there as well. There's puppeteers sometimes, you know. And I think it would be really interesting to, you know, try and put them all together and see if it works.
So for any of our listeners who aren't really familiar with the poetry scene, maybe a little bit interested in seeing what there is out there.
Yeah.
What nights would you recommend they go along to get started?
What nights would I recommend? Well, it depends very much where they are. I mean, I can only really comment on Glasgow and Edinburgh because those are the ones that I'm familiar with. For Edinburgh, I'd say Soapbox is a great one. It's an open mic night, and I think there's an inherent value in open mics because you get kind of all sorts turn up. You get kind of incredible talents that no one was expecting, who just kind of signed up on the off chance. You get people who are, you know, maybe just starting to find their voice, and you can see that there's promise there. So I'd say definitely start with an open mic. Because they're often free, which is another kind of big draw. There's Soapbox. Soapbox is kind of once every 2 weeks, while the rest of them are monthly nights. So there's Inky Fingers. There is Blind Poetics as well. If you want something that is maybe a little bit more polished, I've mentioned them already. Go to one of the Loud Poet nights, because they're usually on at the City Cafe in Edinburgh and at Broadcast in Glasgow. They cost about £4 to get in, but you get a full kind of polished performance. So that's a good time. In terms of Glasgow, there's loads of stuff. Anything coming out with the name High Flight on it is generally a good bet. Twice every month there is In Deep Poetry run by Sam Small at the In Deep Bar, which is just a lovely venue. It's really, really nice. That's an open mic as well. Free to go along, and it's really welcoming. It's a lot of fun. So there's a lot going on. You just need to kind of kick the rock over and see what's crawling around underneath, as it were.
Right. Well, be sure to check out a few of those nights, and best of luck with your upcoming venture.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for sharing your work with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Humanity Podcast. We hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Make sure to give us a rating to let us know how we're doing and help us improve. And if you enjoyed it, make sure to share and subscribe. We'll see you next month for the next episode. Bye for now.